Are we capable? How poverty should be measured and why America has it wrong.
So, how should we define and measure poverty in the U.S. today? Poverty is not an objective line of economic status, but rather a spectrum entailing many different ways in how people are actually doing. Therefore, poverty cannot be defined without doing an injustice to the millions of people living under its grip. It comes in a variety of forms, from social exclusion to limited opportunities. This being said, true poverty cannot be measured quantitatively. However, for purpose of studying poverty numbers in order to grasp how effective poverty efforts are and to gauge how people are faring, we should attempt to focus on the capabilities of people. To do this with numerical values, we should include a post-tax income report, non-discretionary expenses, geographical discrepancies, and whole households, all while excluding money from government programs.
So, what do you think poverty looks like in America? The world we live in today tends to skew the definition of poverty, as it paints a false image of what it means to be poor. So, when you think of poverty, do you picture a homeless man lying in the street? Or do you think of a young, hungry child walking the streets alone? Or is it a life of crime, lacking love and honor? Or is it just the average family whose walls you can't see behind?
So, what does the face of poverty look like? As we just experienced, poverty should not be pinned to one person or group. It is a societal problem. Despite it being a social problem, there is also a danger of stereotyping the face of poverty in a way that might be offensive to those involved. On the other hand, there is the fear that abstraction does not generate enough concern or emotion. However, when looking at individuals, it is easy to evoke an empathy for humanity. That is why it's difficult to educate people about the problem of poverty without generating any stigma around it.
First and foremost, poverty is about more than just money, which is a common misconception. When people, including myself, first hear the word poverty, we automatically think not enough money. However, that is the first place we are wrong. It is not about income lowness, as the OPM, which we will address later, might argue, but instead about income inadequacy. Income lowness only matters when it is inadequate for being and doing what is necessary to living a sufficiently full human life. Which brings us to the topic of capabilities versus functionings. Capability alludes to the question, what are my options? Capabilities are the total set of beings and doings that are available to someone. Capability is being able to do something if you wanted to do it. It is all about freedom of opportunity. While functionings are the things that people are actually doing and being. It is when people no longer have certain central freedoms that they should be considered living in poverty. Sin rightly argues in his video that poverty is a deprivation of capability, and we strongly agree with his capability based approach to poverty. This is not to say that income does not matter, because indeed it does. It is income that allows us to assess if people have the capabilities to function. Overall, the capability perspective provides a much better understanding of poverty.
Okay, hang on. To add another layer of complication, capabilities, which we believe to be the best approach to defining and understanding poverty, exist in different forms. First off, there are internal capabilities, which, as Nussbaum describes, are trained and developed traits and abilities. For example, this can be your personality, intellect, emotion, health, talents, and other things of the sort. Combined capabilities are the totality of the opportunities one has for choice and action in his or her specific political, social, and economic situations. Combined capabilities are made up of both internal capabilities and external context. Therefore, internal capabilities must first be fostered if combined capabilities are the ultimate goal. And remember, it is combined capabilities that we believe indicates whether or not someone is able to live a fully sufficient life. Imagine a child who is bright, physically fit, creative, and ambitious. He dreams of being in the military, but his parents prohibit their children from serving in the military because of religious beliefs. This would be an example of someone with internal capabilities but lacking combined capabilities because of their external context. On the other hand, imagine a child who has cerebral palsy. Although his family may have the financial means to give him choice in what he eats, wears, and drinks, he may not have the mental capacity to choose, exhibiting that he lacks some internal capabilities.
Martha Nussbaum went so far as to make a list of the 10 central capabilities that she believes are vital to living a dignified life, which is something sin was unwilling to do. Nussbaum's list includes life, bodily health, bodily integrity, senses, imagination, thought, emotions, political reason, affiliation, other species, play, and lastly, control over one's environment.
Nussbaum sets a bar for each central capability that says if you're below this threshold, then your dignity is being threatened. For example, she may emphasize bodily health over other species and set the play threshold somewhere in the middle. But who's to say what's most important? While Nussbaum appears to have the best intentions in mind as she is looking out for when people's dignity is threatened, her list, although unintentionally, threatens people's dignity. We, we still do not agree with the fact that she is dictating what other people's life should look like.
An adequate lifestyle is a very relative, subjective topic, just as poverty is. There is no one certain adequate lifestyle, but instead it should focus on a way of life in which people are able to feel like an active member of society, without feeling shame every time you interact with others. One's specific functionings and therefore adequate lifestyle vary based on their society. Is it a very affluent society or a relatively lower class community? Take Mr. Blue, for example. Mr. Blue has an autonomy, what he thinks is best for himself, while others may have an idea of what his well being should look like. If Mr. Blue decides to fast for religious reasons, would force feeding Mr. Blue strip him of his dignity in the process of trying to protect his bodily health? If the point of anti poverty work is to protect people's dignity, then that means that their choices and their liberty matters. We must respect their autonomy while being concerned for their well being. And this is where it starts to get tricky. Because imagine doing this for millions and millions of people, where each person has a different autonomy and each person deserves dignity and respect.
Robert Rector argues that poverty is not as big of a problem as the media portrays it. However, we believe that poverty must focus on the deprivation of capability, not just statistics that paint a pretty picture of poverty. Just because poverty may not look exactly how people think does not mean people are not suffering. Also, the fact that people living under the poverty line have luxurious conditions, as Rector describes it, indicates that there may be a fault in the way we define poverty, therefore suggesting we may need a better measure in place. So, although we agree that poverty should be defined in terms of capability, we realize that there must be a more concrete quantitative measurement in place that refers to income.
In America, there is a line in place that dictates whether or not people are in poverty. But does having $1 more than the poverty threshold make you suddenly well off? Here is where the problem lies, and that's why we have to be very critical when we decide what the cutoff for poverty should be.
The OPM is the current poverty measurement in America. However, it is extremely outdated. Molly Orshansky used data from the 1955 Household Food Consumption Survey to create a threshold that is 3 times how much the average family of a certain size spends on food. Although the threshold has been shifted for inflation, the cost of food has changed greatly from 60 years ago, altering the ratio of people's income they may be spending on food. It is said that food is now around 1/6 of families' expenses today. Also, the threshold varies based upon size of the household and age of its members, but it fails to recognize people living in a house combining resources, unless they are related or married. Regardless of where these houses are located, the OPM remains as one cutoff line, meaning that people who live in Chicago or rural Kansas have the same line that says whether or not they are in poverty. It also utilizes people's pre tax income, meaning that money that people aren't able to spend on tangibles is still included in the threshold. It does not account for in kind government benefits, such as the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program and housing credits, or near cash benefits, such as the Earned Income Tax Credit and temporary assistance for need families. The OPM does not include medical out of pocket expenses or other non discretionary expenses such as childcare and work related transportation. On the flip side, the OPM does have its advantages. It is an easily calculated value on a wide scale. The OPM has also been consistent over the last 60 years, giving analysts some concrete data for comparison.
Take Mr. Blue again, for example. Let's pretend that the poverty line is 20 M&Ms and Mr. Blue has 25 M&Ms, which means that he is 5 M&Ms above the poverty line. Some of his M&Ms go to taxes, some are spent on childcare, and some he needs to spend on insulin for his son's diabetes. Now, Mr. Blue is only really capable of spending 15 M&Ms, which would make him 5 M&Ms below the poverty line. Yet, this would not be recognized with the official poverty measure.
The Supplemental Poverty Measure, or the SPM, is an alternative measure that is quite different from the OPM. It attempts to capture an entire household's needs by using a basic set of goods, including food, shelter, clothing, and utilities, also known as FCSU, which is more accurate than the OPM's basis on only food cost. It also uses post tax income to more accurately capture households' disposable income. While they attempt to be thorough in including all benefits and costs, it can be harmful to include government benefits, because this may bring people above the poverty line who cannot provide their households with all the necessary functionings in reality. So it does not give us a good grasp on who is struggling without government help. However, the SPM is a good indicator of effectiveness of current poverty efforts. It also includes non-discretionary expenses like childcare and work-related transportation, since this is money that cannot be spent on FCSU. In addition, medical out-of-pocket expenses are included, which is wise when we are referring to families with members who may have more medical expenses than others. In terms of disadvantages, the SPM, which is more difficult and timelier to calculate on a large scale due to geographical differences. It also lacks the ability to compare history with the present, like the OPM does.
So we have come up with our own poverty measurement, one that bridges the gap between the problems associated with the OPM and SPM. What we are trying to do is really capture the money that people are able to put towards opportunity and choice. We do this by excluding government benefits in order to discover how people are actually doing without outside assistance. We also want to use people's post-tax incomes and account for geographical differences. Both of these factors obviously have large effects on one's disposable income. We are attempting to capture people's capabilities by excluding non-discretionary expenses from people's disposable incomes and including all necessities, not just food, clothing, shelter, and utilities.
Some problems that we foresee with our measurement is being able to define a non-discretionary expense. Is transportation to a job a non-discretionary expense when they could have gotten the same job closer to their house? Is childcare a non-discretionary expense when there is a relative living nearby? Also, how can we account for geographical differences in every area when there are virtually infinite standards of living across the United States?
But how can we be sure that people's 10 capabilities are being met with this measure? And the answer is that we can't. As we discussed with Mr. Blue, autonomy versus well-being for each individual person across millions and millions can be very difficult. Therefore, poverty will only have imperfect measures, and there will not be one that can grasp nearly every person who is experiencing poverty. Our approach is simply an attempt to capture poverty numbers in terms of capability. However, we recognize that it is not perfect.
So what now? What can we do to help? The reason we want a good definition and measurement for poverty is because we care about people. Everyone deserves the opportunity to be a functioning member of society. And I would encourage you to look into what poverty really is, behind what our society has framed it as being.